please take your seats. It did come on tape.
Well, that's what happened last time was the power came on.
It's an obstacle course of wires. So we've looked at the history, we've looked at the trends, we've heard from the young voices, talked about the politics, and now it's time to look ahead at the future of redistricting. We have another legislative panel today, this afternoon, and here to moderate and introduce them is Robert Scott with PAR. Robert.
Well, you threw me out the door and I came back in the window. Glad to be back in front of you again. Again, Robert Travis Scott, President of the Public Affairs Research Council, here to moderate this panel on opportunities for reform with 4 attorneys. So we look for diversity in our panel today. Denise Marcel has just joined us. Prior to that, everybody was going to be under 40, but she is too, we all know. And you can use your own imagination whether I'm under 40. If it had not been for Denise stepping in at the last minute, we would have had an all-male panel, which we almost had. And by the end of the session, we probably would have decided that we need to use football games to decide districts in Louisiana. But we'll see if we can mix it up here a little bit. Let me make some introductions. First of all, Julie Stokes, Representative Julie Stokes cannot be with us today, but I think she's going to be up and raring to go next week. She's doing better. Let's start with Tanner McGee, who is District 53. Also serves on the Civil Law, Health and Welfare Judiciary Committee. I might add that we have a lot of folks here who've had a lot of involvement, including Tanner and others, in fiscal issues. And the only way we were getting here today is we promised they would not have to answer questions about taxes or spending. So those are going to be off the table. Tanner was not around for the last redistricting, but will be for the next one. Let me jump over here to Ted James with District 101 here in our area. He's in Ways and Means. Very much a fiscal guy with a lot of experience with tax bills and also in criminal justice and labor. He was a staff member last time we had a redistricting, and he will be here next time around. Maybe. Well, that's all. Maybe, yes, maybe. And then Representative Walt Leger, Speaker Pro Tem. I would say what committees he's on, but he's basically everywhere at once, as we all know, on the House side. District 91 for the New Orleans area, and he's term limited out in 2020. And so we'll look for him on the Senate side when it's time to do our next redistricting. And then we have Denise Marcel, who about 3 minutes ago was asked to join us on the panel, so please cut her a break. She hasn't had much chance to think about it. She's with District 61 here in town. She's on criminal justice, municipal affairs, and transportation. I have learned that when you get a group of legislators together, you can tell them what the topic is, and you can tell them what they're supposed to address, but a legislator for the first 5 minutes, they're just going to get something off their chest. So I'm just going to let each of you just go ahead and fire away and give each of you just a few minutes to go ahead and talk about this issue and get it off your chest, and then we'll get back to some more specific questions. And why don't we just, Denise, I'm going to let you go last so that you have some time to collect your thoughts, and let's just start on this end and go down. Tanner, have at it.
Thank you for having me. When I think about redistricting, I kind of can't help but think about my own district. And if I had to describe my own district, I would describe it as maybe an old school district. It's kind of a throwback district in that it's not heavily Republican, it's not heavily Democrat. It's actually kind of split even between Democrats, Republicans, and independents. They're roughly equal. In fact, Republicans, last breakdown saw was the minority vote was the third lowest in my district. Independents, had more independents, had more Democrats in my district. I'm a Republican. But it was not an environment where a Republican can't win. It's not an environment where a Democrat can't win. And frankly, it's not an environment where an independent can't win. So it's unique, I think, as far as districts are now being created. And I have not a large African American population, but I have a sizable one. And the way it affects me is I have to vote and make considerations to all three of those. I can't get too far out on the limb on anything because I have a third of a third of a third always trying to check me back towards the middle, which to me is good when if the idea of state government is for us to work together. It puts me in a position when I start out with a negotiation that I have to work with them. I don't think other members in our body have that same dynamic going on, so it puts them in a situation where they don't have to worry about the minority portions of their districts at all because they can get elected without them. And so I find it more productive. I find I'm at a better spot, and it frankly gives me a little political cover if I want to do something that I think is appropriate to do in the best interest of the state, best interest of my district, that some won't like. Well, I can always point to the highest numbers of the other demographic breakdowns of my district as a reason to why I'm doing what I'm doing. And I think that's helpful. I think it's lost, and I think if we keep gerrymandering these districts any kind of way that we're doing it, we're going to lose that. And I think that's one of the biggest problems we have, is that we don't want to compromise because our people don't want us to compromise. If you have a district that's 80% Republican or 80% Democrat or 80% whatever, they don't want you to compromise. They want you to do their straight line values and stuff like that, which those are good, but if we want to actually have a government that takes into account for everything and works and compromises when it needs to, I think we need to have that in the district.
Thank you. Well, Walt?
Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Robert. And I want to thank everyone who helped to make this summit a possibility. I think there are a few issues that are of such great importance that they sort of make up the foundation of our very way of governing and of working towards the best state that we can possibly have. This, to me, is summed up very well by some of Representative McGee's comments. I think, unfortunately, the first thing that most legislators think of when they hear redistricting is their district, their quote-unquote district. This is the fundamental problem with legislators taking part in redistricting. The practice of choosing your constituents and not having your constituents choose you is something that I think, from a fundamental standpoint, flies in the face of what it is that we should be doing. But to take the sort of the personal approach and the self-interested approach out of this process, I think is the challenge that we face as we discuss things that we can do in the future to make it better. I see redistricting and the policy set in this area as a battle between realism and idealism, and a battle between politics and pragmatism. I took part in the last redistricting session, and I can assure you it was not the most pleasant of processes. It was very challenging to avoid some of the things that I think the average citizen would like us to avoid. And that, in my view, what we need to be discussing is what are our ideals? What is it exactly that we're trying to accomplish? And what is it exactly that best serves the interest of the state? I'm not, we obviously all have different views on what those priorities should be. Some say that it should be competitiveness. And I take that to be competitiveness between Democrats, Republicans, Independents, in a legislative seat. I'm not sure that should be our priority. It seems to me that what we need to be doing is zeroing in on how we can best set up our state government to represent the people of this state. I look forward to kind of having a discussion as we go forward on what I think those priorities should be. I tend to think that geography needs to play an important role, and that districts need to be very compact. And that I think when we draw districts like that, we tend to get the right sort of representation that seems to best serve the interests that Representative McGee talked about, which is, sort of a very broader view of what state government is supposed to do, with a localized focus on those geographical needs that each district has.
Thank you very much. Ted, your thoughts?
Thank you. And again, I want to echo Walt's comments and thank the organizers of this event. Redistricting is very important to me. I'm probably the only one in the House that didn't have an opportunity to vote for himself when he ran, because I ran in a district, in a brand new district that was created here in Baton Rouge. I had bought a house and was preparing to run in the district where Denise represents, and then I started to pay attention to the process, and I recognized that there was a brand new district being created in Baton Rouge, and there were some very, very heavy hitters in that other race, Denise being one of them. So I made the smart decision to run in a new district and jumped in the district with 6 other people. So I beat them instead of having to beat Denise real bad. But in all seriousness, so the issue has always been something that I paid close attention to, and Tanner, I think, hit it on the head. When you watch Tanner as a legislator, he is the poster child for how a district should look, because what he talked about is, he's accurate. He has worked well with both sides. He's worked well with all issues, and I think that his district basically forces him to do that. And I know Tanner's a good guy, but his district forces him to do that. My district is of course, a majority African American district, but I only have about 62% African American voting population in my district, and I can remember campaigning. I represent, for those of you in Baton Rouge, I represent half of Sherwood Forest. Sherwood Forest is a very conservative part of Baton Rouge, and the most conservative part of my district, and I can remember knocking and folks looking at me like, we don't elect Democrats over here. And it was shocking for me to show up, and they had some Republicans in the race, and I kept telling folks, I was like, hey, you might not feel comfortable with voting for me, but a Democrat is probably going to win just based on the numbers. So I continue to knock on doors. My campaign manager's like, why are you knocking on Republicans? I'm like, hey, they might not vote for me, but I at least want to earn their trust, because I'm going to win and I have to represent them. But it was very shocking to me to hear that from folks in the district. Number one, they had no idea that the district had changed. So I'm walking around with a huge map of the entire district to tell folks, look, I know you like Hunter Green, but he's not representing you anymore. And on the other side of town, I had to tell folks about Representative Barrow. Like, they're gone. They're not going to represent this area anymore. But it was very telling to me, and to hear Tanner, it is very compelling when, because I am on Ways and Means, so I hear a lot from folks in the Sherwood area about issues that come before Ways and Means, and a lot of times my votes don't really align with some of what my constituents are asking of me to do, but I pay particular attention to them because I recognize that their voices should matter. In redistricting, I think that everyone has some fault. As far as it doesn't require 80% African American district to be competitive. And I think that during the last process, we could have created more seats where African Americans could at least be competitive in those if we weren't focused on trying to produce an 80% African American district. And the same goes for those partisan districts. You don't need an 80% Democratic or 80% Republican district, because what happens is you silence that other 20%. Now I know with my district, I could basically ignore certain people in my district based on numbers. We try not to, but based on the numbers, in too many districts across the state, too many voters are silenced because of the numbers and because of how districts are created. And Walt brought up something that is also very important to me, and that's geography. When I look at congressional maps as a Democrat from Baton Rouge, I have a lot of concerns when I look at those congressional maps. I have a lot of concerns when I look at the map for the Supreme Court, the Public Service Commission, because I believe that as the capital city, we should have done better. We should have done better to secure more representation for this area. And that's something that largely goes untalked about in redistricting, those regional things, because with the strength of the capital region, I think that our voting strength should be more. In Congress, I think that it should be more. On the PSC, I think it should be more, even in the legislature. So there are so many different issues, and who knows if I'll be around to debate them in the legislature, but I would hope that this is something that not just this conversation doesn't end with today. I know that some of the organizers, my good friend Matt Bailey, I know he's not going to let it end today. But for all of you who are not actively engaged in the process, I commend you for being here, because this is a very, very important discussion, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Ted. Well, Denise, it's your turn.
Thank you.
You ready?
Yes,
Okay.
I am. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers as well, and thank you for pulling my coat as I was on my way out of the door to leave. I've been here all day. I didn't just walk in at the last minute like Ted James. Let me say that to start. But I'm honored that you asked me to participate, because you did need a woman's view up here on this last panel. Also, I want to clear up something. I'm not an attorney. I'd like to go to law school. I am a paralegal. And I'm just barely over 40, so let's start with that. Let me say that I've been listening all day, and a lot of the issues that have certainly come up on this panel have been important issues, not only to me, but to a lot of my colleagues. I believe that geography is going to play a huge role, but for me, I want to see transparency in that process. I want the public to be able to come in and voice their opinions and look at maps and different people to bring in ideas. I do believe, however, that the legislators should be making these decisions ultimately. I don't think that it's going to be any problems with it, because as you've heard earlier today, we got smartphones and technology, and so we'll be able to figure out what is best for the state. I will say that I was not there in 2008. I ran and I lost due to the district being changed primarily to try to benefit another candidate. So I'm fully aware of what can happen in the legislature and in the Senate in order to favor another candidate. I was, however, involved in the process on the city council, and it's totally different. It's primarily done by the staff. Of course, they bring the council members in, and one of the things that they do is make sure that that council person's seat is drawn within that district. But outside of that, almost anything else goes. Certainly, Tyra Wicker's district now goes from South Baton Rouge all the way down to Southern University. So that, and I heard that come up earlier today on one of the panels, the fact that the legislature could change that, and that they could actually be involved in the city council's redistricting as well as like the judges, the judicial system. And I, like Ted James, I'm interested in equity throughout this process, whether it's a congressional district or judicial district or state representatives or Senate. I think that we can come together. I think there's going to have to be crossing over of the aisles to come together and do what's best for the citizens of the state, and not be all about ourselves, and not try to draw districts that, you know, clearly there are no interests at all, but certainly not packed districts. I probably have one of the most heavily Democratic districts that's in Baton Rouge, and I believe that I can win a race even if it's against Ted, if we reduce that number. So I'm looking forward to working on this. In fact, I've asked to be change committees and to get on the House and Governmental Affairs Committee. And so I'm interested in learning more about this work, and certainly I'll be around to answer any questions that you may have.
Well, thank you very much. I can't wait for the next redistricting where they put both of you all in the same district. You know, we heard the previous panel, and I guess to sum up what I heard from that is that this is all very complicated and challenging, and we're doing fine. Well, what's the next problem you want us to solve? So my challenge to the four of you is to see if you can go a little further beyond that sort of framework. You know, there's a lot of things that are going to happen. I think we're probably going to have a new set of rules about partisan gerrymandering. We'll see. Maybe the courts really won't go that far, but we may. We talked about this earlier before y'all showed up. What do you see that's going to be different next time, or that should be different next time, whether you keep the legislature in charge or not? Who wants to go first on that?
I'll go first.
Okay.
What I believe that you'll see different is, I think there's a more consensus on people not packing districts. I've heard it over and over again from a lot of my colleagues where they're not interested in packing their districts to have 70–80% of one, either minorities or Republicans or Democrats. And I believe what you'll see is that we'll be more apt to reducing that number in a lot of our districts in order to have a better representation throughout the state. And that's one of the things I'm looking forward to seeing.
And James, I mean, Ted, you said something similar. You talked about how you didn't think 85% was necessarily needed to be the goal, but do you think your colleagues would agree with you?
I'm not as optimistic about it as Denise. And being a Democrat, I don't know what the power feels like. So I know that how hard it is for some to relinquish power. So I'm not as confident that the members of the, and again, you guys should remember when we go through this process, the legislature you see today will not be the legislature that goes through this process. So you have another round of legislators will go through elections in this new era, this new time. And I'm focused right now, not really focused, but I'm monitoring the Supreme Court because I really want to see what happens with these cases. I want to see the ruling. I've read some of these cases and some have looked at equal protection. One dissenting judge talked about how it may potentially violate the free speech of individuals because you're basically silencing those folks that want to run in certain offices because they don't have the numbers to even be competitive. So I'm looking to see how the legislature will use whatever happens in the Supreme Court as a guide. But for you guys, remember that you will elect a brand new set of legislators before this process happens. So this should be an issue when folks are coming to you. Ask them how they feel about the issue of redistricting when you're talking about tops and these other things, because those are the folks that will be tasked with going through this process. And you know, terms, we're losing great minds like a Walt Leger, like in the House, we're losing Pat Smith. So you're going to get new folks that have no idea what the bathrooms are in the Capitol, and then they're going to be creating brand new maps. And it is I worked in the process for 6 years before I ran, and it was eye-opening for someone that had worked there for 6 years. So for someone brand new, you get folks that aren't from this area, their first day in the state capitol ever is the first day that they get sworn in. So you guys, you know, make this an issue in the upcoming election as well.
So Tanner, you are a Republican. Are you feeling the power?
Sometimes. You know, well, it's we kind of counterbalanced by having a Democrat governor, and I think that was going to be my answer is, you know, I think going forward, Louisiana answered the question last time, will we elect a Democrat governor in the state of Louisiana? We said yes, the circumstances are right. I think now the question everybody wants to know is, will we re-elect a Democrat governor in the state of Louisiana when it's red? And I think that'll play heavily, actually, in what redistricting looks like next time. Once we know what the field of governors is going to look like, we see candidates emerge in these legislative races that you know, are going to be pro-John Bell, pro-somebody else, pro-Republican, and I think that future makeup of who gets elected will determine what those maps ultimately look like.
Like we said earlier, the governor can veto bills.
Yeah.
So whoever's governor can have quite an influence on the process.
Absolutely.
Veto override is a tough bar. Walt, can you break this out of the framework?
Yeah, so I mean, ultimately what, I think Ted's right. Any changes to our redistricting process are gonna have to be driven by the public and by voters. They're gonna have to, you know, we are gonna have to hold legislators accountable for the type of transparency and the type of redistricting process that we have. And so if there is no additional engagement on this issue, I think you can expect to find that redistricting will continue along the lines that it has for some time now, which will be, which will be legislative lines drawn very much in accordance with the status quo and with, incumbent protection in mind as they get drawn. However, I do think, Denise suggested this, and I think she's absolutely right. I believe that additional transparency and additional public engagement is the answer to the challenges that we're currently facing, because that's the only way to hold elected officials accountable for the decisions that they make. Without very active engagement from the public at large, it is very easy in the redistricting process to move precincts around, especially along the edges of a House district or a Senate district, without anyone noticing or ever discussing it or ever having a question asked to have this topic truly debated. There is a built-in, political reality that makes it difficult to question an amendment offered by another member during the redistricting process, because each time that you question the movement of those precincts draws more attention to the movement of precincts involving your own district. And so what it creates to me is a sort of closed process that doesn't necessarily get expanded outside of the rails of the legislature, and in many ways, creates the situation that we continue to work in today. I think the only way to change those motivations is to hold people accountable. You saw this happen with the legislative pay raise issue back in 2008, where the legislature sort of, and I think it's a very apt comparison to draw, because you had a very new legislature impacted by term limits for the first time, in the same way that in 2020 you will have a very new legislature impacted by term limits, asked to do certain large things, especially redistricting in 2021. This bill largely goes through. The governor says he'll support it if the legislature passes it, and then the public outcry reached a level where the governor ultimately vetoed it because of political pressure. And legislators who voted for it actually backed off on it and asked the governor to veto this piece of legislation. People vowed not to take it if it became law, and all sorts of things changed, all because of public pressure. And so with public pressure, there can be the accomplishment of things that are difficult, and you can make it very difficult on legislators to make self-interested choices just by shining, sunlight on that process. So, one of the things I'd like to see happen is, I would like to see maps developed earlier in the process, vetted by the public, and I'd like to see there be a debate and a discussion about whether or not some sort of a citizen panel should be put together to view various maps and then make recommendations to the legislature on 2, 3, 4 different maps that are acceptable, and then the legislature consider those proposals without the ability to amend them. I'm not sure that's the answer. I just think it's a possible methodology by which you can engage the public deeply, and you could cut down on some of the self-interested sort of decision making that I think muddies the process a little bit. But again, I think the broader public engagement, not simply public meetings and discussion, but some sort of real engagement, is what can ultimately drive some meaningful change in this realm.
Well, it's a really good point. You sometimes hear people address this issue by saying, well, if you don't like what the legislators do, you just don't have to vote them in again next time. And that always seemed to me to be, while it's true, a kind of defeatist outlook on what the legislative process really is. The legislative process is something where the citizens can be engaged throughout the process and not just waiting for election day to do it. And I think that's, Walt, kind of what you're talking about. So Walt has opened a little window here on something a little different. This is something we've talked about a lot. We're not foreseeing some kind of new big commission being created in Louisiana. At least that's not what we're hearing today so far. But we are talking about legislators not being the only ones who have serious substantial input into what the maps might be like, such as having a starting point where you could begin with a set of maps or begin with a legislative and citizen panel at the same time trying to contribute something. So let me ask, Walt has just gone this direction, I'm going to ask the other three of you, what is the realm of the possible if you're looking at trying to stretch a little bit the process of what could happen and should happen?
I think we should definitely start earlier. I like the idea of the public being engaged in the creation of the maps. I don't think I could agree without us being allowed to amend them. I won't go that far, but I would like to see a very intentional process that starts a year out, allowing members and folks in the public to really take part. And I hear all that. You could elect, vote us out in 4 years. I know how intimidating it is to engage in this process. It sounds very easy. Yeah, just vote them out. It is not hard. It's not easy to run for elected office. It is not easy, especially against an incumbent. So I hear my colleagues say that. I don't subscribe to that. But I will say that the process is open. And just like a normal, any bill, you guys have an opportunity to show up just like you showed up today and testify, make recommendations, email, call. So I don't subscribe to the whole thing that you elect us and we go away for 4 years, because if you allow that, then a lot of that is on you too, because you have to hold our feet to the fire and stay engaged in the process. So I know.
Denise or Tanner, do you want to stretch the envelope a little bit?
I'll say something I think, kind of based on my own experience, that I would like to see. And this may be out there in some form, and I may be showing my ignorance, but I was just some guy that ran for office. I didn't have any parents or political people behind me. I just decided, I'm gonna do this. And it was very difficult for me to find a map of the district I wanted to run for. And so, I found colored ones, and this is geographically what it looks like. It's this oblong shaped thing in southeast Louisiana. But I'm talking about a specific map like you'd expect in Google, where it shows this neighborhood, this street, this person lives in your district. I think we took a very simple step and made that map readily available to public, easy to find, and people could see exactly what the district is. And look, when I was running, people would tell me, "Oh, I love Gord. He was the best state rep ever." Gordy was the district next to me, so they weren't even sure who their state rep was. And I think that, to me, is the best thing that we could do, is have a very clear, defined map of what they are right now. And then as the process goes along, you can see how the map will change. And I think if people knew exactly what the districts were and where they were going, then they can get engaged, like Walt's saying. Right now, how do you get engaged in the process? Because it's all these, you got to call so-and-so to get the map, and is this district, and you talk to some old timer who knows the map in his head, and it's a confusing process for a person who believes himself to be reasonably intelligent to get into this thing, and it's difficult for them. I can't imagine for John Q. Public, who has even less access to these things, and we live in the 2018. It seems like this should be available on the internet fairly easily, or on your phone.
So we have the technology and the software to create a lot of imaginary maps, but getting the real map, you're saying, is even harder than doing that. That may be the case. Denise?
I'd like to agree with Tanner, and that's why we call him Tiger at the Capitol. He jumps right in. And so not only do I think we need to make the current maps readily available to our constituency, but I also believe that we need to have those maps sent out a lot earlier, as Ted has said, and have the public input in those. I would have to agree with Ted. I usually don't agree with Ted this much, but in the amendment part, without us having the ability to amend it, I don't see that as happening or getting any traction in the legislature, because we always have the right to amend. However, I do believe the public's input and the transparency is going to be key and paramount in how we get this done and get it done together. I think that's always important. And we do have the process of you coming to committee meetings and calling. A lot of times, let me just throw this in for free. If you send us a generic email that 99 people have the same one, 100 and some people have the same email, we know you just copied and pasted. Pretty much all of us, they're not gonna admit to this, will just throw that in the garbage because they all the same emails. But if you send us a personal email, something, your own thoughts, we stop and we read that and we take notice of that. But if you just got a generic email that a whole group of people sending, I'm telling you, they throwing them in the trash. So be specific about your concerns, not telling you not to do that with an organization. I'm just telling you that we read them, and I know I read mine. And so I will respond to those. And so you have to hold legislators accountable by staying in contact with them constantly on these issues and other issues, and come to the Capitol and make your presence known.
So, Robert, if I could
why don't you jump in then?
Yeah, I mean, one, I want to make sure that I'm not being overly critical of legislators. Obviously, legislators have an important role to play in this process. And the point I guess I was trying to make is, as we develop, I think we can all agree that more engagement is better than less. And as we talk about and work towards more public engagement, we ought to also be working towards more adequate public engagement that actually has an impact and has some authority to weigh in on that decision, besides just, you know, the testimony at a committee meeting. We did, I think, a great job when we did the last redistricting of having public meetings all over the state of Louisiana and in communities across the state. But ultimately, the process still boils down to a relatively closed off process that makes it difficult for people to engage. And I think Tanner's comment and the others about higher quality maps, more public access, that all addresses some of the concerns. But I really hope that we'll, you know, keep trending towards some engagement that has some level of authority, not ultimate authority necessarily, but some level of true engagement.
That is a very good point, and one that has a lot of people talking about it, so thank you. Now, we have time for some questions. Glenn? Glenn Kevin, Secretary of the Senate.
This is more in the line of a statement, but so that everybody in here understands, that process is controlled by the Constitution and by what the federal government does with regard to reporting the census data to us. Census is taken on April the 1st, 2020. By law, the President of the United States reports that census numbers by state, and it's just a total number for each state, by December the 31st of 2020. That determines how many congressmen each state gets. Then the Census Bureau provides the redistricting data, which is the PL 94-171, Public Law 94-171. It requires that data to be presented to the states at the block level, precinct level, so we can use it for redistricting. Census does that as a rollout. Now you talk about in 2010 or 2011, we were one of the few states, and I think there's 4, that was an election year. 2011, we had to do an election. So between the time that Census rolled that data out to us, we had the complete redistricting. Then we had, after that, to do the submission to the Justice Department, 30 to 60 days, and have all that done before qualifying for these new districts, which is getting the data out to everybody to know what new districts they're in. So we were on an incredibly short fuse. That's the Constitution of Louisiana. That's what it requires. Now, 2020, the election will be in 2019. So we have until December 31st of 2021 to complete redistricting. The Constitution says you have to complete it by December 31st of the year following the year, which is reported by the President. So we have an extra time. You get extra time. you will be able to do that. But everybody needs to understand that the legislature has got certain guidelines, and you talked about it earlier, to follow the law. We have to follow the Constitution. We can't do anything any sooner than we get the data. So I just thought that was important to bring out.
Thank you, Glenn, and it's always good to have a fifth panelist come on. I mean, Glenn, you've done, what, 4 redistrictings? Yeah, so what does he know, right?
He's got more experience.
That's right.
So it's all his fault.
Someone needs to do an oral history with Glenn.
I think that's an important point. There was a tremendous time crunch on the last one, and there will be additional time to get some more public input. And that gives us a chance to come up with some really solid answers to some of the concerns.
All right, time for maybe another question. Here, this lady here. Do you have the microphone? Right here near the front.
How would you implement the speaker's recommendation for having a citizen panel? Would that be by legislation?
Yeah, I think that any changes to the redistricting process require legislation. I think the Constitution of the United States is very vague as it relates to congressional redistricting. The legislature just sort of has authority to do that as they see fit. And then we've passed laws that sort of guide how that works. But yeah, I mean, other states have looked at a variety of things, and we'd have to design some structure that made sense for the state of Louisiana. It could be done by application and appointment. There's any number of ways.
Yeah, different versions of this are done in other states. That sort of launch point of what it is that's brought to the legislature. But the legislature does have to make the decision unless something really fundamental were changed.
Right.
So even if something independent or a citizen committee came with an idea, the legislature would presumably still have to approve it.
I would add to that, though, in taking away procedurally, I think in actuality what you're saying is it's something that would be somewhat controversial. I can tell you we're not going to get that on the first try.
Sure.
And so what we'd actually do is create a task force, because now we love task force to tell us what we should be doing in our jobs. So,
And then ignore it.
so we would create a task force that would meet for a year to determine this new process, and then they come back with recommendations.
And then we'd amend those.
Then we'd probably tell task force they were stupid and we didn't like their ideas. And then then eventually somewhere in between those two things, we might be able to get some.
Well, this is really hurting a lot more than junior.
That's something
Having been I've been on 5 task forces in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
Okay, one more question. All the way in the back. Is that Sarah? Okay, all the way in the back. Sarah has a question. A question from our youth.
Thank you very much. Speaker Pro Tem Walsh talked about this a little bit, but I'd like to know, what would the feasibility be of maybe not having so much a public commission, but like a nonpartisan commission of experts, and passing a resolution to say they could have sort of a set of guidelines and do a starting point. So nothing legislatively mandated, just to say to, again, new people coming in, hey, like maybe these are some things to consider when you're doing redistricting. How would that process go about? Do you think the Governmental Affairs Committee would be open to a resolution like that?
I'm a future member of the House Governmental Affairs Committee.
Well, nothing would prohibit you from doing that now. I think what you're asking is for us to form something or make some type of resolution.
Let's just give us the odds of whether you think this type of thing is a good idea or what.
I think it's a good idea, but what I'm saying to her is that we can do a resolution creating a committee, and nothing would prohibit you from doing that. I think what Representative Walt Lee J is saying, that if you are part of that process and you want to change the way we're doing it now, then something would have to be done in the legislature. And I don't want to put any words in his mouth. But
Okay, gives you a chance to put some distance between you and Denise.
I almost agree with her. But Denise is right. Let's look at the goal. If the goal is we are going to create this independent panel, the legislature shouldn't be doing it. If you want to keep pushing it, go ahead. It's probably not going to happen. But if the goal is a fairer process, there's nothing that is stopping you or any other group from hiring a demographer, putting together maps, lobbying the legislature, and stressing the importance of how you want those maps to look. Too often, the public you guys have an idea. You don't have to wait on us to do it because we don't know all the answers. Farm it, let it farm organically. You form your own bipartisan commission. You contact all of us, you call us, you sit down with us and present the maps.
Great. We're running out of time. Walt, you're going to take us out.
So I think what you're saying is potentially the creation of an advisory type expert panel that would make recommendations that wouldn't necessarily be binding, but would create some more accountability and buy-in from the public. And I think that's something that you could get, I think, almost certain buy-in from legislators to try to work through that process. Ultimately, if it doesn't have authority to make a recommendation that's then binding, you have to question whether, what kind of impact you can have. And some of these states have passed laws, in my mind, that are wishes and hopes. They have, but that don't really have a whole lot of meaning. There's some legislation that says you can't consider previous elections when you redistrict, and you can't consider political information when you redistrict. I mean, we could pass a whole bunch of things like that. It wouldn't really mean very much.
This is the opportunity panel, so we're going to end this way. Hope or no hope? Hope, hand up, panelists.
There's always hope.
Hope?
Hope and wood. There's always hope.
I'm not just giving it general, because we got to go out on a high note here, because this is an opportunity.
What kind of hope? The 2008?
He's the realist. I love it.